So, what do you know, we still live in a world where they can't make a proper video game based movie, and it's not for the more obvious reasons outside of most games being unadaptable to be condensed into that long form to short form format that most games have kind of taken in the direction of. And really, when it comes down to it, I think if you got a straight adaptation of most video games, you still wouldn't end up with a fantastic or compelling movie. Dead or Alive is one of those things that I think captures the spirit of the game almost perfectly, and therefore is a pretty horrid movie to watch, if not ironic and somewhat enjoyable. Actually, in many ways, it was a very bad film. The Tomb Raider films, on the other hand, seem to carve out an identity of their own under the lead of Angelina Jolie, who really took Lara Croft in a direction that the games themselves never quite went in, but then again, to make the films as good as they were, or at least perceived to be at the time, and have kind of held up in their own way because they have an identity that is separate from the games Lara Croft is actually from. They're stupid in many ways, really. They don't quite follow the format of what the Tomb Raider games did, and they weren't afraid to go out on their own and try and create something different, which is unfortunately where I think this film, the new Tomb Raider, kind of falls flat, mostly because it tries to go in the direction of the game itself and following it almost to a T, unlike the Jolie Tomb Raider films that really came out with their own plot and reason for Lara to be doing what she's doing. Our Lara Croft now is different. She's almost exactly like she was in the games, except for the parts where you actually see her grow as a character and learn and do compelling things, and most of the issues and complex character growth Lara receives in the games is completely absent in this film, which is a downside, yes, and while a lot of it was likely to be scrapped in favour of truncating the plot into more simple things, it's not a case of the plot being truncated from the game, it's actually a case where it's been ripped out and replaced with other stuff to make it slightly more relatable to people who saw the original Tomb Raider films, and an idea, or at least a perceived idea, of what Lara should be and how her identity should have been, as opposed to what it is in the new reboots and how it's different from what it was both in the original games and in the Jolie films. Now, am I saying Tomb Raider is a bad film? Ironically, I don't think I am. In fact, there's quite a few enjoyable moments, and even with the constrained budget, which I think is what changed the ultimate climax of the film from being the same as the game, I don't think the film is without merit in some of the choices it made, and ironically most of these tend to be the pre-game plot of the film. There's an extended introduction to the film itself, which sees Lara before she goes on her big adventure, when you see her and how she's chosen to live her life, which is pretty much ignoring that her dad died, or at least how her dad disappeared and is most likely to be dead, and how she won't claim her inheritance, that she's actually smart, that she actually has some MMA skills, and she's been training herself in fights as well as doing random BMX, or at least cycling stuff as well. And while it's not really what you'd see in the original Tomb Raider games, I'd also argue that you never really saw Lara fighting giant robots in the Tomb Raider games either, and therefore doing something like this is helpful to introduce us to the Lara that we want to see in the films, and I have no problem with it there, and it's actually fairly entertaining as well, and it allows us for a couple of early steps into who Lara is, and I didn't mind that whatsoever. In fact, I found it the most enjoyable part of the film. Where the film kind of lost it for me was when we saw what the film was actually taking from the game plot and character-wise, as opposed to what the game actually had, which is pretty much nothing from then on. Once Lara actually makes it to the island, it's almost a completely original plot that's based on the elements of the game, but doesn't really have any overlap. Most of Lara's friends and companions from the game are gone in favour of the boat captain, who you meet slightly earlier on, who goes on to have his own slight subplot, but outside that doesn't really embody any of the spirit of the characters that actually were in the original game, and therefore Lara doesn't receive any of that growth from the original game. He has his own thing that his father, like Lara, has disappeared, which means that his, ironically, has daddy issues in a way as well. I also think in choosing to have, which now we're getting spoiler territory, is the ultimate hook of the plot with Himiko not be a standard monster supernatural thing like it was in the game, but a virus that almost is a zombie virus in all ways and forms, might as well have just been magic. And I think it's the parts that try to copy the game mostly that really show off just how little budget the film has overall, and this is the reason why I'd like the film to actually do well, so it could take another stab at this kind of stuff. But ultimately, there's no Matthias, there's no Himiko in the way the game's represented, and therefore there's no big major supernatural threat for Lara to overcome. In fact, Lara goes through most of the film saying there is nothing supernatural, with Lara's father, who's revealed to be alive, actually believes there is, which is something I ironically thought did need to happen. I thought there needed to be something supernatural to actually aid in this film, mostly because the main villain of the film is someone who I felt slightly relatable to, or like they were trying to go to for that reason. All he wants to do is get off the island by finding this thing so he can go home and see his daughters. It's something that I actually find slightly compelling for the villain, and ironically as well, had they chosen to go in a supernatural direction, I would have been more than happy with him and Lara team up at the end of the film to actually stop this thing, because they both realise it's something that as a supernatural entity cannot be allowed to leave the island, and having the villain maybe change to sacrifice himself as opposed to being the ultimate threat who Lara has to kill, something that would have made for a clever, compelling twist on top of characters who they'd introduced for the film outside of not using the characters from the game, who are very much behind the idea of Himiko and its supernatural personality being something that needed to be reborn into the world. In fact, there are many things on the island I wish the film didn't do, and most of them do stem around Lara's father, who I think really needed to be left dead for the entirety of the film. I think if Lara had got to the island and found out that he had survived some time on the island and been ironically handicapped, all of those bad guys trying to actually work out where Himiko's tomb was that whole time, and he'd ultimately died in favour of that, but maybe the cave he lived in had been something Lara had stumbled across, and got to see all the things he did while he was trapped on that island without him actually being alive would have been a nice little clever resolution that wouldn't have meant we needed to spend hours and hours on daddy issues to go along with it. If we'd actually gone with the supernatural plot, I couldn't help think that maybe Lara could have taken one of her friends with her from London on the adventure as well, and that would have led nicely into maybe something in the realm of the Himiko and Sam plot from the game, which would have been something else good as well, and it also would have given Lara more people to talk to, someone else to have a non-daddy issue based relationship with as well. I think this is me just projecting on what I wanted the film to be based on what I think it should have been to be a bit more entertaining, but as it is, it makes it a by the numbers kind of adventure film that isn't quite Indiana Jones and isn't quite an Uncharted film and isn't quite any of those things where you expect it to become supernatural at the end. In fact, with every main character except for the old kooky dad character being the one who is in favour of actually something supernatural being at work here, it's actually quite depressing that a Lara Croft film chooses to go that far into gritty realism when no one else really expects it to. Also, by handicapping many of the things in the games, especially Lara's kind of growth through everything that happens in the game, you find that she just kind of jumps from being one thing to another. Everything for Lara's growth is kind of okay up until she gets to the island, she's tracked by one of the hunters of the bad guys and ultimately kills him. This is as far as into the game's characterization it goes. You actually see her, and thankfully the actress playing her, selling that I've killed a person for the first time, and when she's with her dad she grabs a bow and arrow, which is kind of the closest you ever get to seeing the game Lara as well, and she goes on a little archery hunt for a little action scene too that isn't great, and the action scenes overall aren't amazing, and that's because I think the film tries to add in elements of the game thinking they'll be the big compelling selling points, when I actually found the non-game based action scenes of the film earlier on the ones that really made a big difference to me in what I thought of the film overall. There's something weird about people working out puzzles in films that does tend to get a bit boring, and ironically, while Tomb Raider, the film does kind of avoid this with many of the puzzles in the game, you do get an extended sequence later on in the tomb as well, where they're working their way there with one of the traps that the floor is falling apart and they're constantly flipping out gems to try and find the right colours to solve the puzzle. I would have expected something a little more grandiose, at least from Tomb Raider, especially given what the hidden tombs in the games were like. It really felt like another little disappointment in not really knowing how to do that kind of stuff. And it's not that these silly little puzzles and things have to be game-like. You could take it in that opposite direction of making them so over-the-top game-like, where everything moves everything and they're long, interconnected puzzles that really look visually astounding. For all the stupidness that Waterworld gets, when you see the world come alive and see how everything leads to everything, you could really go into that direction and make a puzzle that where a switch changes a lever and you see all these wonderful things happening as the puzzle comes alive and Lara's solving it. That would be an interesting visual direction to go in, but as it stands, they either don't show you what she's doing with the puzzles, or when they do, the puzzles itself is blatantly boring and nothing but like you would in the game, endlessly swapping over solutions until something works, hoping you don't die in the meantime. I suppose that leads us on to the virus in many ways, and oh god, that virus, it's a zombie virus. It's a mythical zombie virus that isn't actually a real virus, or is a virus in such and not really a supernatural thing, and therefore there's nothing supernatural in this film, and Himiko was just a poor lady who had a bad skin infection, who ultimately chose to lock herself in her own tomb as a sacrifice so she didn't hurt anybody. Noble, yes. Completely wrong in the spirit of the game, yes, and completely wrong in the sense of the character historically as well. So, you know, for a Tomb Raider film that kind of prides itself on that historical accuracy of an archaeologist character who loves everything she does, the film itself is completely wrong on that information as well, which is ironic as well. Even if no one really cares about that sort of accuracy in a film like this, it's pretty stupid too. I think many of the elements that they chose to borrow from the games were mishandled. Trinity perhaps being the biggest one, because that's what we get ultimately for our sequel hookers, showing there's a bigger threat out there that Lara needs to deal with when she ultimately returns to England and accepts her inheritance and that her father's died, and all the supposed character growth for the film, which is when the film itself chooses on its very end hook to jump into, oh, Lara isn't quite this Lara that you thought she was going to be from the game. She's actually now taken her first big step to becoming the Angelina Jolie Tomb Raider, which I really hope is just fan service and they don't go down the direction of, because I don't want that. I don't want a film to be ultimately saying, oh, this is how she was until she had a big grand adventure that really wasn't that grand in the grand scheme of things, and now she's gone and become a gun-toting person who doesn't really care about all the issues that she used to have. She's just a big kind of fun archaeologist who likes to now go and shoot things like Angelina Jolie's Tomb Raider did. I appreciate the nod to the films, but I don't appreciate that being the supposed character that this version of Lara is working towards. I don't quite like that, and I'm not quite on board with it. If you wanted to have your nod to the other Tomb Raider games, why not do the exact same thing that they did in the game itself, with Lara having two guns for the final fight of the game? Why not do something like that, as opposed to have, oh, let's not have an Angelina Jolie cameo, let's just pretend that Lara's on her way to becoming that specific character, which is a disappointment. I think, in my case anyway, I see it as that. Tomb Raider, the new film, is, as I said, it's a disappointment, but it has potential, and I really hope that if the film gets a second shot, which I think is probably what they're aiming for, something that the actress in this can use between bigger films, maybe, to just do little action things. I guess if this was a passion project, but it doesn't really feel like it. But I hope that future films would be doing that, and they can take it at least one more step in the right direction if they get a sequel to this, and, you know, show us what a Tomb Raider film could be, because I think there's good potential in there to do a great film. I think most people will probably disagree, but I really liked the first half hour of it, and I really hope that they get another shot at trying something like this where they don't feel as hamstrung by needing to copy the game formula and completely miss the part of the game formula that was most important to Lara herself. Either way, tell me what you think of the film, if you've seen it. Most people are still watching Black Panther, so you probably haven't seen it, and this week people are watching Ready Player One, so you may not be seeing it. So tell me what you think of it once it comes out on Blu-ray, okay? Bye.